SNK vs. Capcom Chaos is a bit of a weird game in more than one way. Whereas the crossover made by Capcom, the Capcom vs. SNK games are highly celebrated and some of the most iconic fighting games of all time, SVC didn't exactly show up in the same way. While not much is known about the actual development process itself, in the years prior, SNK was going through hard financial times due to the underperforming sales of their consoles and games, and also the decline of the arcade scene. This led to them being acquired by a Japanese pachinko company, which eventually filed SNK for bankruptcy. So SNK no longer existed, but an affiliated company called Playmore acquired SNK's former IPs and started creating games again with them. With all the chaos that was going on during the early 2000s, honestly, they probably didn't really have much time to think about creating a good video game. They just needed the money. All of that being said, though this game isn't exactly a shining example of good video game design, I still wanted to talk about it because I feel like it really demonstrates why good stages, music, and story are so critical to the reception of a game besides just the gameplay alone. Which, honestly speaking, for this game, wasn't even that bad. Overall, I would say that the music design of this game is on the weaker end. Unfortunately, the sound system for this game is pretty limited because the hardware is meant to play on an older Neo Geo arcade machine. SNK has done great things before with these limitations, but these compositions for the most part are just not for me. I will say that it's not all bad. There are some good songs in here. In this video though, I'm not going to be talking about the music in every single stage since there are really only a select few I feel are very noteworthy. From a roster perspective, I will say it's honestly pretty dang cool to see the Capcom characters in SNK style. Dare I say that the roster choice is even more interesting than when Capcom was doing their game. For example, I do love Morgan, but having a Darkstalker that isn't Morgan in this roster is just really refreshing. Same thing goes with having more Samurai Showdown reps that are more varied than just Nakaruru and Hawamaru. Also, Zero and Mars people are just wild picks that I love to see. Now, let's talk a little bit about that story. Or really, non-existent story unless you read the comics. The SVC comics aren't traditional American comics per se, they're actually Chinese manhwa. Manhwa is the Chinese equivalent to something like Japanese manga, and this is not to be confused with manhwa with a W, which is the Korean equivalent. All of these comics have different art styles and different cultural contexts and subject matters. This particular release is packaged as an American trade comic, which has 3 volumes of the original release in one package. From the game itself, you really learn nothing about the actual story, and even the American manual doesn't really get into the lore of the game. So needless to say, I really had to hunt for this information in the SVC Chaos comics. I don't even know if this is technically the official plot or not, but this is the only piece of media I really have to go on since the game itself won't tell you. As for the comics themselves, well, they're a little janky. The English translation is, well, they tried their best. Just to give you a little taste of what I mean, the translation uses the words super technique in volume 1 and then special moves in volume 2 whenever characters do specials. Translation mishaps aside, in terms of the art, it's honestly not that bad either. For the comic strips themselves, I do actually think the art here looks pretty good. My one complaint here is that it oftentimes switches between this more cel-shaded style and a more painted style, and this kind of threw me off. Like, it's okay to do it in different separate sections, but having them right next to each other like this is very jarring. Let's finally get to the actual plot of these comics. So, M. Bison has a plan to transplant himself into Orochi Iori's body, but Iori wants to join this parallel universe tournament that's going on and kills himself before Bison can do so. The tournament itself, I think, takes place in Purgatory, so the only way you can get there is by being dead. In a fit of rage, Bison uses his satellite to kill pretty much the entire population of Earth, after which many other fighters die and join up in this parallel tournament. The winner of the tournament will have any one wish granted. So every single character on this roster, with the exception of the 2 final bosses, are all dead. They all had to die to get into this tournament, meaning every single stage in this game, with the exception of 2, are in Purgatory, which gives the appearance of this post-apocalyptic Earth, which is pretty wild and very un-Capcom and un-SNK-like to even have this plot to begin with. This would even be a really weird plot for Mortal Kombat to have. It seems pretty straightforward when I just lay it out like this, but a problem I ran into when I was reading the comics is that it's not too clear what is even happening until the end of the second comic. At the end of the volume, you also see the first instance of an actual stage showing up in the comics, that being the railway stage. So with those two volumes, the story of SVC Chaos is much more clear now, albeit pretty goofy, though I did enjoy reading it a lot. I don't really feel like it's the best story or anything like that, but with the context behind the comics, I can at least say that it makes sense why everything looks so degraded now. Let's get back into the stages from the game. On the select screen, you'll see that each stage has two names. One of the names is the stage intro for arcade mode along with the military time. There's also a second, more simplified name in training mode. Most of these stages are a single color or shade of the same color with a very low contrast palette. However, these muted colors are just part of the reason that I generally don't like these stages that much overall. A second thing is the lack of interesting animations or set pieces in the backgrounds. There's nothing here that makes you think, oh wow, these are such memorable stages. I don't really think there's much of a focal point or really any interesting things to look at. I will say that these backgrounds just seem a little bit out of place given that previous SNK and Street Fighter games were super colorful. I'm not saying you can't do the whole post-apocalyptic thing, but you have to explain the context of why visually. Like, you could put the reason in a game's story mode in the cutscenes, but most casual players and arcade players probably won't really look into it anyways, so you need these context clues to be fairly obvious in the gameplay itself. Now let's go over each of these stages in further detail. The factory stage is, to no one's surprise, located in front of a factory, and it has this very tan color palette. From this, we can see that the factory is in heavy disrepair and is very aged, so probably a lot of time has passed since this place was abandoned. There seems to be another part of the factory, or maybe wall, or maybe city right behind it. With how huge this structure is, I think it really adds to the whole alien, futuristic vibe of the stage. Like, this isn't really something that could be built with today's technology. The only animation in the stage itself is this river with the trash and debris being carried along the current. Even though there's so much shit in the background here, this place still seems very empty to me. Next up is the railway or station obsolete stage, which occurs at exactly 6 AM. I get heavy Japan vibes from the lights here with the tall skyscrapers in the background, but this isn't necessarily a thing exclusive to Japan. Details include the flickering train lights as well as those in the facility to the left. There's puddles of water on the ground, so also presumably it just rained. And unlike the last stage, you do see a little hint of greenery in the left and right corners, so I guess that does break up the usual mono palette a little bit. Also, really quickly from a music perspective, I noticed that this particular song is very unnecessarily dramatic, like something imminent is about to happen. There's nothing really happening here and there's really no sense of urgency, so I'm not sure why it's going so hard with the heavy percussion and the blaring notes in the beginning. Whatever bad thing that was gonna happen here has already happened. It's not a terrible song, but I just think something a little bit more morose or maybe dreary would have been more appropriate. Next up is Chapel, aka the Nude Place. I tried doing some research into where the term the Nude Place might come from, which I assume is some sort of Christian church reference, but to the detriment of my search history, I didn't find anything particularly relevant. Ain't no one getting naked here. One cool thing about this stage is that even though the end of the world has probably already happened, it's not all that bad. We still got birds. Interestingly, you can also see a lit lantern, which is a bit odd here because it shows that someone might still be living here. There are also two statues in the background, but only one is clearly visible. Overall, the color palette of the stage is very greenish, with a hint of color from the red curtain and the stained glass window, or at least they're more colorful than anything else on the stage. Music-wise, the organ church-like sound isn't bad and fits in well with the chapel theme, though the shuffling sound here kind of throws me off. I don't like that. Green of Forest, or the Forest stage, is visually one of the best levels in the game to me. It's a forest with a deer and a fawn just hanging out. And this stage tells me a bit of a story as well. My theory is that this game is almost trying to do a little bit of social commentary. Like, because civilization and cities were destroyed and people died out, nature and animals have had time to flourish and recover. To me, it's just nice to see that some sort of life still exists and it's not totally depressing. So you could say that this stage is a literal breath of fresh air. Also, I like the singular green color palette here, and I think it does work because of all the nature set pieces. As far as exactly where in nature, this stage probably takes place high up in the mountains. It's in the middle of a stream right by the edge of a waterfall, which you can tell since the edge here is really clean and abruptly cuts off. Assuming that there actually is a waterfall that starts here, it's probably not as crazy as the one in the background, which you can see has a very heavy water flow. Also, if you look at the full version of the stage that can't really be seen in-game, you can see that on the far left, you're coming out of a cave of sorts with a rock formation overhead. And just to touch on the music really briefly, I have a similar issue here as the railway stage where I think something more peaceful would be a little bit more suitable. Sky Sanctuary or Sanctuary really just feels like it should be a boss stage to me, but for whatever reason, it's just another stage. The existence of this stage, though, just brings up more questions rather than answers about this parallel dimension that we're in. What is this diamond here, and who is this person standing here? Are there humans after all, or just this one guy? Also, the sky seems to be moving super fast. Is that because of this place specifically? There are also some birds flying in the background. Are they flying away? And also, what are these statues here? You do get some clues in Volume 12 of the original manhwa release, which I was able to acquire, and the manga in English calls this place the Crystal Shrine. Athena seems to be associated with the stage, and perhaps this is the gateway to heaven. However, the person in the back doesn't look like anyone who appears in the manhwa, so I suppose that'll just remain a mystery. One thing I can say for certain though is that the music here is definitely more fitting than some of what we've heard before, and in particular I really like the synthesized choir sound. Next up is the SF stage, and I have no clue why it's called this. I don't think it stands for Street Fighter. Maybe it stands for like Super Factory or something. I don't know, you think of something better. Either way though, it looks like you're on some sort of elevator that looks like it might be going in a circular motion because of the curved look to the background. And you can also see there's some big ass loose cable in the background. This song is almost the encapsulation of the music I hate in this game. The first 9 seconds of this song haunt my dreams, literally. When I played this game when I was a kid, the first 9 seconds would get stuck in my head over and over and over again. So to me, this is the defining song of this game, and in the worst way possible. The Omake stage is on a lift that's moving horizontally, and this is where you fight Violent Ken and Orochi Iori. There is a shadow of a big fan above you, which seems a little weird that there's a fan on an open-air tram going pretty fast, so I assume the fan's effects are nullified. Since the tram speed alone might be enough to cool someone off, but I don't know, I guess it gets hot in here sometimes. There's also a TV displaying what I assume is a feed of the tram's path. In Volume 22 of the original release of the manhwa, yes, 22, this seems to be a lab connected to Shadowloo in some way, after M. Bison is trying to influence Ken to get him on his side and thus creating Violent Ken. Overall, I would say that this stage kind of reminds me a little bit of the SF one, with the lift, moving background, and more blue-colored palette. Now we finally get to the best stage in the game in my opinion, which is the Guardian Dog's Temple or boss stage at 0100 hours or midnight. From a visual perspective, the first thing my eyes are drawn to is the big fire in the middle of the stage surrounded by swords, which maybe belong to warriors from the past. Another fantastic feature here is the lighting effect, with presumably the light coming from the fire. Your characters are outlined by the torchlight in the darkness, and I cannot stress how fucking great this looks. Behind the big torch, you can also see some Japanese lion dog statues guarding a temple called Koma Inu, which are meant to protect the shrine from evil. If the torch was out, this stage would probably be mostly black, with the exception of some candles scattered by the temple and also a light coming from the ceiling, which has some bugs flying around it. I also really like the bamboo grove with the fireflies on the far left, which adds this very nighttime summer ambiance. A secret stage, Athena's Holy World, is just straight up heaven, where your character exclusively fights Athena, and the stage here is heavily influenced by the idea of heaven and Christianity. I guess Christianity is canon in this world according to SNK. We also see inspiration for the stage from various famous Renaissance-era paintings, which were themselves widely influenced by Dante's The Divine Comedy. In Dante's poem, heaven is said to be made up of 9 different circles that eventually lead to the home of God. Maybe I'm kind of overthinking it, but I feel like you can kind of see that circular sort of pattern reflected in the stage with the clouds in the background, with the weird sun or maybe even eye in the middle perhaps representing the eye of God. Either way, this isn't really an uplifting or nice stage like you'd expect heaven to be. It definitely gives me the creeps, and I don't like all of the little angel babies with these very abstract looking faces. The music here also really just adds to that very eerie tone with the howling in the background, the organ, and the bell sounds. Honestly, this is probably one of the nuttiest stages in fighting game history when you really think about it. Any character being here should just be losing their frickin' minds for multiple reasons. We've been in hell in a lot of different video games, and especially fighters, but for heaven, no other examples really come immediately to mind beyond like Kid Icarus Smash stages. Does that count? When your characters actually have a match on the heaven stage, everyone who has conversations with Athena reacts to the stage in different ways. Also, if they lose the match, your character turns into a unique animal. And if you pick Athena in arcade mode, the default stage for all of the matches will be the heaven stage. The same thing happens when you pick the red Arremer, except instead of heaven, you get the stage of village in the maniac world/hell. If you happen to pick both Athena and the red Arremer at the same time, the stage will default to whoever is player 2. So if Athena is player 2, you'll get the heaven stage, and if the red Arremer is player 2, you get the hell stage. Similar to when your characters fight in heaven, everyone who fights the red Arremer reacts to being in hell differently, and everyone who loses to him turns into a unique demon. So let's talk about the stage itself. This depiction of hell was likely heavily inspired by Christianity, as well as various Renaissance paintings, which again were probably inspired by the Divine Comedy, specifically the first part of the poem, which was called Dante's Inferno. You have these really grotesque looking faces on the ground, as well as some faces in the trees, with the one on the right specifically looking like they're in agonizing pain, whereas the one on the left looks sad and almost resigned to their fate, like they're not new here. The area you're in looks like some sort of graveyard surrounded by dead trees with a red swirling vortex in the background. It's kind of funny that the stage is more terrifying than most Darkstalker stages, which is actually supposed to be more of a scary themed game. But not only do you have all these stage elements, the lighting here is also really different and makes your characters look kind of yellowish. You also have Firebrand just hanging out in the top right corner, but he's really hard to see unless you use a super to take a look or hack the game. All these factors combine with the creepy Silent Hill-esque atmospheric music that has this howling and background sounds, and this stage certainly stands out among the more blander stages in this game. SNK really missed the big opportunity to do something really special with its ability to use Capcom characters, but I also understand that it wasn't totally SNK's fault with all the shit that was just going on at the time. Unfortunately, all of those things just led to, in my opinion, just a very okay game whose plot honestly just got left on the cutting room floor. Though I will also say that, even if this game had the plot fully laid out, it's not really going to change the fact that most of these stages and music are just super boring. I do wish that all of these factors were more of a priority in the final product compared to what we got. Thankfully though, it does seem like SNK and Capcom are in a much better position than they were before, with a lot of collaboration games from the Neo Geo Pocket getting re-released lately. I sincerely hope that we can see another future SNK Capcom collab made by SNK themselves, and that they can get another opportunity to take a crack at it again.